Sarah Martinez had always been smaller than everyone else. At 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighing barely 120 pounds, she looked more like someone who belonged in a library than on a military base. Her voice was soft, almost musical, and she had a habit of tucking loose strands of dark hair behind her ear when she was nervous. Which was often. When she walked into the recruitment office in downtown Phoenix on a blazing hot Tuesday morning in July, the sergeant behind the desk looked up from his paperwork with barely concealed surprise. He had seen all types walk through those doors over the years, but Sarah looked like she might blow away in a strong wind. "Can I help you, miss?" Sergeant Rodriguez asked, setting down his pen. He had daughters of his own, and something about Sarah reminded him of his youngest. "I want to join the army," Sarah said quietly, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I want to be a soldier." Rodriguez studied her for a moment. She was dressed in simple jeans and a white cotton shirt, nothing fancy. Her sneakers were old but clean. Everything about her screamed ordinary, except for her eyes. There was something in those dark brown eyes that made him pause. "What makes you want to join?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. Sarah took a deep breath. "My brother was killed in Afghanistan 2 years ago. He always said the army taught him to be strong, to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. I want to learn that too." The sergeant nodded slowly. He had heard similar stories before. Family members wanting to honor fallen relatives. Usually, they changed their minds once they understood what military life really meant. "The army isn't easy," he said gently. "Basic training is designed to push people to their limits. Even strong, athletic people struggle with it." Sarah's chin lifted slightly. "I'm stronger than I look." Rodriguez smiled. "I'm sure you are. But military strength is different from regular strength. It's not just about muscles. It's about mental toughness, about not giving up when everything inside you wants to quit." "I understand," Sarah said. "I still want to try." 3 months later, Sarah found herself standing in formation with 49 other new recruits at Fort Benning, Georgia. The Georgia heat was brutal, even in October, and sweat was already beading on her forehead despite the early hour. Drill Sergeant Thompson was a mountain of a man, 6 feet 4 inches of pure intimidation. When he walked down the line of recruits for the first time, his boots made sharp clicking sounds on the pavement. He stopped directly in front of Sarah. "What's your name, recruit?" he barked, his face inches from hers. "Sarah Martinez, drill sergeant," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Thompson's eyes narrowed. "Martinez, you look like a strong breeze could knock you over. What makes you think you can be a soldier?" "I'm willing to work hard, drill sergeant." Thompson snorted. "Work hard?" "Recruit, in 10 weeks I'm going to break down everything you think you know about yourself and build you back up into something useful. Some of these people," he gestured to the other recruits, "might make it. You?" He shook his head. "I give you 2 weeks before you're crying for your mommy." Sarah felt her face burn, but she kept her eyes straight ahead. Around her, she could sense the other recruits watching, waiting to see if she would break down right there in formation. "We'll see, drill sergeant," she said quietly. Thompson's eyebrows shot up. "We'll see? Did you just sass me, recruit?" "No, drill sergeant. I just meant that I plan to be here in 10 weeks. For a moment, Thompson stared at her. Then, he moved on to the next recruit. But Sarah noticed he glanced back at her twice during the rest of the inspection. The first week of basic training was harder than anything Sarah had ever experienced. The physical training started before dawn with push-ups, sit-ups, and running. Lots of running. The first time they did the 2-mile run, Sarah finished dead last, gasping for air and fighting back tears of frustration. "Don't worry about it," said Jessica, one of her bunkmates, as they walked back to the barracks. Jessica was tall and athletic, a former college basketball player who made everything look easy. "You'll get stronger." Sarah nodded, but she could see the doubt in Jessica's eyes. She could see it in everyone's eyes. Even the other recruits who struggled with different aspects of training seemed to think Sarah was in over her head. The doubt hurt more than the physical pain. Every morning when she laced up her boots, Sarah had to fight the voice in her head that whispered maybe Drill Sergeant Thompson was right. Maybe she wasn't cut out for this. But every time that voice got too loud, she thought about her brother Miguel. He had been everything she wasn't: tall, strong, confident. Growing up, he had protected her from bullies, helped her with homework, and always believed she could do anything she set her mind to. "You're tougher than you think, little sister," he used to tell her. "Size doesn't matter when you have heart." Miguel had earned his Ranger tab before deploying to Afghanistan. The small black and gold patch had been his pride and joy. Sarah remembered how he looked wearing it on his dress uniform at their cousin's wedding, standing straight and proud. After the funeral, their mother had given Sarah the folded flag and Miguel's medals. But Sarah had asked for something else. She wanted to know everything about the Rangers, about what it took to earn that tab. What she learned amazed her. Ranger school wasn't just about being physically strong. It was about leadership under pressure, about making decisions when you were exhausted and hungry and everything hurt. It was about never giving up, no matter what. That's when Sarah made her decision. She wouldn't just complete basic training. She would become a Ranger. The problem was, she had never mentioned this goal to anyone. Not during recruitment, not during processing, not even to her bunkmates. She knew how crazy it sounded. Women had only been allowed to attempt Ranger school for a few years, and very few had ever passed. For someone like Sarah, who struggled just to keep up with regular basic training, it seemed impossible. But impossible didn't mean she wouldn't try. After the second week, things started to get better. Sarah's body began adapting to the constant physical demands. She was still the smallest and often the slowest, but she stopped finishing last in everything. More importantly, she stopped giving up. During a particularly brutal obstacle course exercise, Sarah found herself stuck at the rope climb. Her arms were shaking from exhaustion, and she had already fallen twice. The rest of her squad had finished and was waiting for her. "Come on, Martinez," shouted Marcus, a big guy from Texas who had become something of a friend. "You got this." Sarah looked up at the rope stretching 15 feet above her. Her hands were raw and bleeding slightly from previous attempts. Every muscle in her body was screaming at her to quit. Instead, she grabbed the rope again. This time, she focused on Miguel's voice: "You're tougher than you think." Hand over hand, she pulled herself up. Her technique wasn't pretty, and it took her 3 times longer than anyone else, but she made it to the top and rang the bell. When she rappelled down, Drill Sergeant Thompson was waiting for her. "Not bad, Martinez," he said. Not good, but not bad. It was the closest thing to praise she had heard from him, and it felt better than any trophy she had ever won. By the 4th week, Sarah had found her rhythm. She would never be the strongest or the fastest, but she was becoming something else: reliable. When other recruits were ready to give up during long marches, Sarah would encourage them to keep going. When someone was struggling with their equipment, Sarah would help them fix it, even if it meant less rest for herself. Drill Sergeant Thompson noticed. During a particularly challenging field exercise, he pulled her aside. "Martinez, you're different than when you got here," he said. "Still small, still slow, but different." "How so, Drill Sergeant?" "You don't quit. That's rare. Most people quit in their heads long before their bodies give out. You?" He shook his head. "I've been watching you. You fail, you get up. You fall behind, you catch up. You might actually make it through this thing." Sarah felt a surge of pride, but she kept her expression neutral. "Thank you, Drill Sergeant. Don't thank me yet. We've got 6 more weeks, and they get harder from here." He was right. The second half of basic training introduced weapons training, tactical exercises, and more complex physical challenges. But Sarah was ready for it in a way she hadn't been at the beginning. During weapons training, she discovered she was a natural marksman. Her small size, which had been a disadvantage in so many other areas, actually helped her stability when shooting. She could hold steady positions longer than bigger recruits, and her scores were consistently among the highest in the company. "Where did that come from?" Jessica asked after Sarah had scored expert on her rifle qualification. "My brother taught me to shoot when I was younger," Sarah said, running her hand along the rifle barrel. "He said it wasn't about being big or strong. It was about being calm and focused." It was the first time Sarah had talked about Miguel to any of her fellow recruits, and Jessica's expression softened. "He sounds like a good brother," Jessica said. He was. As graduation approached, Sarah realized she had not only survived basic training, she had thrived. She wasn't the same scared girl who had walked into that recruitment office. She was stronger, more confident, and she had proven to herself that she could handle whatever the army threw at her. But, more importantly, she had proven she was ready for the next step. On the night before graduation, Sarah sat on her bunk writing a letter to her parents. Around her, the other recruits were packing their things and talking excitedly about their next assignments. Sarah had received orders to Fort Stewart for advanced individual training as a military police officer. It was a good assignment, one that would give her valuable skills and experience. But she had already decided she wasn't going to Fort Stewart. Instead, she was going to request assignment to the 75th Ranger Regiment. She was going to try out for Ranger School. She knew it sounded crazy. She knew most people would try to talk her out of it. But she also knew that Miguel would have understood. "You're tougher than you think, little sister." As she sealed the letter, Sarah smiled. Tomorrow, she would graduate basic training. And, the day after that, she would take the first step toward earning the Ranger tab that would honor her brother's memory and prove once and for all that strength came in many different forms. The graduation ceremony was everything Sarah had imagined. Families filled the bleachers, and the new soldiers marched in perfect formation across the parade ground. When Drill Sergeant Thompson handed her the certificate marking her completion of basic training, he leaned in close. "I was wrong about you, Martinez," he said quietly. "You're going to be a hell of a soldier." Sarah's parents were there, tears streaming down her mother's faces as she watched her daughter receive her first military achievement. After the ceremony, they took pictures and went to dinner at a restaurant off base. "We're so proud of you, Mija," her father said, using his childhood nickname for her. "Miguel would be proud too." "I hope so," Sarah said. "Because this is just the beginning." Her parents looked puzzled, but Sarah didn't explain. She would tell them about her Ranger School plans later, when she was ready. For now, it was enough to have completed the first step of an incredibly long journey. That night, back in the barracks for the last time, Sarah lay in her bunk and thought about how much had changed in 10 weeks. She was still small. She was still quiet. But she was no longer weak. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of requesting assignment to the Rangers. She knew it wouldn't be easy. She knew she would face skepticism, doubt, and possibly outright rejection. But she also knew she was ready to fight for it. And if there was one thing basic training had taught her, it was that she was a lot tougher than anyone, including herself, had ever imagined. The request for Ranger assessment and selection program sat on Colonel James Harrison's desk for 3 days before he finally picked it up. He read the name twice, then checked the accompanying files to make sure there hadn't been some kind of clerical error. Private Sarah Martinez. 5 feet 2 inches. 122 pounds. Recent graduate of basic training with above-average scores in most areas and expert marksman qualification. Harrison had been commanding officers in the Ranger community for 15 years. He had seen thousands of soldiers attempt the program, and he could usually predict within the first few hours who would make it and who wouldn't. This request, however, puzzled him. On paper, Martinez looked like exactly the wrong candidate for Rangers. She was small, inexperienced, and had no combat experience. Her physical training scores were respectable but not exceptional. There was nothing in her file that screamed elite soldier. Except for one thing. Harrison flipped to the recommendation letter from Drill Sergeant Thompson, a man he had known for over a decade. Thompson was not given to exaggeration or sentiment. His recommendations were typically brief and factual. This one was different. "Sir," it read, "Private Martinez is not the strongest soldier I've trained, nor the fastest, nor the most naturally gifted. However, in 23 years of training recruits, I have never encountered a soldier with greater mental toughness or determination. She failed repeatedly and never quit. She was last in almost everything at the start and never complained. By the end, other recruits were looking to her for leadership. I believe she possesses the intangible qualities that make Rangers successful. I recommend her acceptance without reservation." Harrison set down the letter and rubbed his temples. The Ranger community was already under intense scrutiny following the recent integration of women into combat roles. Every female candidate was watched closely, and every failure was analyzed and criticized. Martinez would be only the fourth woman to attempt the program in the past 2 years. The first had washed out during the physical fitness test. The second had made it through the first phase before being dropped for academic performance. The third had been injured during mountain training. If Harrison approved Martinez's request and she failed, it would add to the growing narrative that women simply weren't capable of meeting Ranger standards. If he denied the request based solely on her physical profile, he would be accused of discrimination. Either way, it would be his decision to defend. Harrison picked up his phone and dialed Thompson's number. "Sergeant Thompson, this is Colonel Harrison. I have a request here for one of your former recruits. Private Martinez. Tell me about her." "Sir, she's the real deal," Thompson said without hesitation. "I know how she looks on paper, but that doesn't tell the story. This soldier has something special." "Special how?" "Sir, you know how some recruits break during training? Not physically, but mentally? They hit a wall and just give up? Martinez hit that wall at least a dozen times. Every time, she climbed over it. The other recruits started calling her the little engine because she just kept going." Harrison smiled despite himself. "That's quite an endorsement." "Sir, there's something else. Her brother was killed in Afghanistan. Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez, 2nd Battalion, 75th Rangers. He earned his tab in 2018. Harrison's expression grew serious. He remembered Miguel Martinez, a solid NCO who had been killed by an IED while leading a patrol. He had been recommended for a Bronze Star. "She's trying to follow in his footsteps," Harrison said. "Yes, sir. But this isn't just about honoring his memory. This girl has earned the right to try. I've never written a recommendation like the one in her file, and I don't plan to write another one." After hanging up, Harrison sat quietly for several minutes. Then, he picked up a red pen and signed his approval on Sarah's request. 2 weeks later, Sarah reported to Fort Benning for the Ranger Assessment and Selection Program. She had spent her brief leave time running, doing extra physical training, and studying everything she could find about Ranger operations and history. Standing in formation with 23 other candidates on the first morning, Sarah felt the familiar sensation of being the smallest person in the group. The difference was that this time, she wasn't intimidated by it. The other candidates were impressive specimens. Most were young men in their early 20s, but they all looked like they had been carved from granite. Several were prior infantry soldiers with combat deployments. 2 were former college athletes. One was a former Marine who had decided to switch services specifically to become a Ranger. And then, there was Sarah. Captain Rodriguez, the selection course director, walked slowly down the line of candidates during the initial briefing. He was a compact man with intelligent eyes and the distinctive Ranger tab on his left shoulder. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "welcome to the most challenging 3 weeks of your military careers. Over the next 21 days, we will evaluate your leadership potential, your physical capabilities, and your mental resilience. Most of you will not complete this course. That is not a prediction, that is a statistical fact." He paused in front of Sarah. "Some of you may be wondering if you belong here. You may be looking around at your fellow candidates and questioning whether you have what it takes. Let me be clear, if you are having those doubts, you probably don't belong here. Rangers are not people who wonder if they can do something. Rangers are people who figure out how to do it. Sarah kept her eyes straight ahead, but she could feel the weight of his words. She wasn't wondering if she belonged here. She was wondering how she was going to prove that she did. The first phase of selection was designed to establish baseline fitness and evaluate candidates under stress. The day began at 0430 with physical training, followed by a 12-mile ruck march with full gear. After a brief meal, there were written examinations on military tactics and leadership principles. The day ended with more physical training and equipment maintenance. Sarah struggled during the first ruck march. The pack, loaded with 50 pounds of gear, felt like it weighed twice that much on her small frame. By the 8-mile mark, her shoulders were screaming and her legs felt like rubber. Around her, other candidates were also struggling. 2 had already fallen behind and were being escorted back to base by instructors. A third was vomiting beside the trail while trying to continue walking. At the 10-mile mark, Sarah found herself walking next to Martinez, no relation, a former infantry soldier from Texas who was 6 inches taller and 50 pounds heavier than her. "You doing okay, little engine?" he asked, using the nickname that had apparently followed her from basic training. "I'm fine," Sarah gasped, though she wasn't sure she was. "Here's the thing about ruck marches," Martinez said conversationally, as if they were taking a casual stroll. "Your body wants to quit way before it actually needs to. The trick is not listening to it. How do you not listen to pain? You don't ignore it. You acknowledge it and keep going anyway. Pain is just information. It's telling you that this is hard. But hard doesn't mean impossible." They walked in silence for a few minutes. Then, Martinez asked, "What's your why?" "What? Your why? Why are you here? What's driving you to put yourself through this?" Sarah thought about Miguel, about his pride in wearing the Ranger tab, about his belief that she was stronger than she looked. "I'm here for my brother," she said. Martinez nodded. "Then, use that. When your body wants to quit, think about him. Think about making him proud." The advice worked. Sarah finished the march within the time limit, though she was among the last to cross the finish line. More importantly, she had learned something valuable about pushing through mental barriers. The second day introduced combat scenarios and leadership exercises. Candidates were given tactical problems to solve under time pressure while instructors evaluated their decision-making and communication skills. Sarah found herself appointed as team leader for a simulated patrol mission. Her team consisted of 4 other candidates, all of whom were bigger, stronger, and more experienced than her. The mission was to navigate to a designated point, gather intelligence, and return without being detected by the opposing force. It sounded simple until they actually tried to do it. 10 minutes into the patrol, they encountered their first obstacle, a creek that was deeper and wider than it had appeared on the map. Sarah studied the terrain, looking for alternative crossing points. "We should just wade across," suggested Johnson, a former Marine. "It's not that deep." "The current is stronger than it looks," Sarah said. "And, if we get wet, our gear will be heavier for the rest of the patrol." "So what do you suggest?" asked Thompson, a tall soldier from Montana. Sarah pointed to a fallen tree about 15 meters upstream. "We cross there. It's dry, and it puts us closer to our objective." Johnson shook his head. "That tree doesn't look stable. We should stick to the water crossing." Sarah looked at her team. 3 of them seemed to agree with Johnson. One was waiting to see what she would decide. This was the moment every leader faced: make a decision and take responsibility for it, or let the group decide by consensus and risk losing control. "We're taking the tree," Sarah said firmly. "Johnson, you're the heaviest. You test it first. If it holds your weight, it'll hold all of us." Johnson looked skeptical but followed orders. The tree held. The crossing took 2 extra minutes but kept them dry and actually put them ahead of schedule. An hour later, they successfully completed their mission and returned to base without being detected. During the debrief, Captain Rodriguez noted Sarah's decision-making and the team's successful completion of the objective. "Leadership isn't about being the strongest person in the room," he told the assembled candidates afterward. "It's about making sound decisions under pressure and getting your team to execute them effectively. Some of you demonstrated that today. Others did not." Sarah felt a surge of pride, but she tempered it with the knowledge that this was only the beginning. She had passed one small test. There would be many more to come. The third day brought the combat fitness test, a series of physical challenges designed to simulate combat conditions. Candidates had to complete an obstacle course, then immediately move to a shooting range for marksmanship evaluation, then finish with a combat scenario involving hand-to-hand combat techniques. Sarah approached the obstacle course with determination but also realistic expectations. She knew she wouldn't be the fastest, but she was confident she could complete it within the time limit. The course included rope climbs, wall traverses, crawling through muddy trenches, and carrying weighted objects across uneven terrain. Each obstacle was designed to test a different aspect of physical fitness and mental toughness. At the rope climb, Sarah used the technique she had developed during basic training. She wasn't fast, but she was steady and didn't waste energy on failed attempts. At the wall traverse, her small size actually worked in her favor. She could find handholds and footholds that bigger candidates couldn't use. The crawling section was brutal. Candidates had to low crawl through a 100-meter trench filled with mud and obstacles while instructors threw flashbang simulators and shouted at them. The goal was to maintain forward progress while staying low enough to avoid simulated enemy fire. Sarah's size helped here too. She could stay lower than the bigger candidates and move more efficiently through tight spaces. She actually passed two other candidates during this section, something that surprised everyone, including herself. The shooting portion played to her strengths. Despite being exhausted from the obstacle course, Sarah's marksmanship scores were among the highest in the group. Her hands were steady, and her breathing control was excellent. The hand-to-hand combat section was her biggest concern. She would be matched against other candidates in grappling and combatives exercises designed to test aggressiveness and technique under pressure. Her first opponent was Williams, a stocky former wrestler who outweighed her by 60 pounds. The exercise was to gain control of a simulated weapon while preventing the opponent from doing the same. Williams clearly expected to overpower Sarah quickly. He came at her aggressively, trying to use his size and strength to end the exercise immediately. Sarah had anticipated this. Instead of trying to match his strength, she used his momentum against him. When he grabbed for the weapon, she stepped aside and used his own forward motion to put him off balance. While he was recovering, she secured the weapon and maintained control. "Time," called the instructor. "Winner, Martinez." Williams looked shocked. "How did you do that?" Sarah smiled. "You're stronger than me, so I had to be smarter than you." It wasn't bravado, it was a lesson she had learned during basic training. When you couldn't win with strength, you had to win with technique and intelligence. By the end of the first week, the candidate pool had shrunk from 24 to 18. 6 candidates had either dropped out voluntarily or been dismissed for various reasons. Sarah was still there, and, more importantly, she was starting to gain respect from her fellow candidates. They no longer looked at her as a charity case or a diversity experiment. They looked at her as a soldier who was earning her place in the program one day at a time. The second week would bring longer marches, more complex tactical exercises, and the dreaded peer evaluations, assessments where candidates rated each other's leadership potential and team contribution. Sarah knew the peer evaluations would be crucial. Technical skills could be taught, but leadership was something that had to be demonstrated and recognized by others. As she lay in her bunk at the end of the first week, Sarah thought about how far she had come. 6 months ago, she had been a scared girl walking into a recruitment office. Now she was competing with the Army's best candidates for the chance to earn the most prestigious qualification in the military. She was still the smallest. She was still often the slowest. But She was proving every day that strength came in many different forms. And she was just getting started. Major David Chen had been evaluating Ranger candidates for 8 years, and he thought he had seen everything. Strong candidates who cracked under pressure. Weak-looking candidates who surprised everyone with hidden reserves of determination. Combat veterans who couldn't adapt to the academic requirements. College graduates who excelled in the classroom but failed in the field. But, as he watched Sarah Martinez navigate the leadership reaction course on day 9 of selection, Chen found himself witnessing something he had never seen before. The exercise was designed to test problem-solving under pressure. Each candidate was given 30 minutes to lead a team through a series of obstacles using only the materials provided. The catch was that the team members were instructed to be difficult, to question decisions, propose alternatives, and generally create the kind of friction that leaders encounter in real-world situations. Sarah's team had been assigned one of the most challenging scenarios: move a 50-gallon drum of simulated ammunition across a mock minefield using only wooden planks, rope, and their collective ingenuity. Previous teams had struggled with the physics of the problem, and several had failed to complete the task within the time limit. What made Sarah's attempt different wasn't her technical solution, though it was sound. It was how she managed her team. When Johnson, still smarting from their previous encounters, immediately challenged her approach, Sarah didn't take the bait. "You've got a better idea?" she asked calmly. "Yeah, we should build a sled and drag it across." Sarah nodded. "That's not bad. The problem is we don't have enough rope to build a sled and still maintain safe distance from potential detonation points. But let me show you how we can modify that idea." Instead of dismissing Johnson's suggestion, she incorporated elements of it into her own plan. By the end of the exercise, Johnson was actively supporting her leadership, and the team had completed the task with 8 minutes to spare. Chen made notes in his evaluation book. Martinez wasn't commanding respect through intimidation or natural authority. She was earning it through competence and emotional intelligence. After the exercise, Chen approached Captain Rodriguez with his observations. "Sir, Martinez is performing better than her test scores indicate," he said. "There's something about her leadership style that brings out the best in people." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "She doesn't try to be the smartest person in the room. She makes other people feel smart. That's a rare quality, especially under stress." Rodriguez nodded slowly. He had been tracking Martinez's progress closely, partly because of the scrutiny her presence brought to the program, but increasingly because she was genuinely earning his attention. "How do you think she'll handle the field phase?" Rodriguez asked. The field phase was the final and most grueling portion of selection. Candidates would spend 5 days in the mountains with minimal food, limited sleep, and constant physical and mental challenges. It was where many otherwise strong candidates finally broke down. "I think she'll surprise us," Chen said. "She's not the strongest candidate we've ever had, but she might be the most resilient." That evening, Sarah sat with several other candidates in the common area, studying maps for the next day's navigation exercise. The group had naturally formed around the survivors of the first week and a half, soldiers who had proven they belonged and were now focused on making it through the remaining challenges. "Martinez," said Stevens, a former college football player from Ohio, "can I ask you something?" Sarah looked up from her map. "Sure." "Why Rangers?" "I mean, no disrespect, but there are a lot of other military jobs that would be easier for someone your size." It was a question Sarah had been asked before, though usually not so directly. She set down her pencil and considered her answer. "My brother was a ranger," she said. "But this isn't just about him. When I was growing up, people always told me what I couldn't do because I was small. I couldn't play certain sports, I couldn't lift heavy things, I couldn't protect myself. For a long time, I believed them." She paused, looking around the group. "But being a ranger isn't really about being physically strong, is it? It's about being mentally strong. It's about leadership under pressure. It's about not quitting when things get hard. Those things don't have anything to do with how tall you are or how much you weigh. Thompson, the soldier from Montana, nodded slowly. You know, when you put it like that, it makes sense. I've served with plenty of big, strong soldiers who folded the first time they faced real adversity. And I've known small people who were tougher than nails, added Williams, Sarah's former combative's opponent. My grandmother was 5 feet tall and raised 6 kids during the Depression. She was the strongest person I ever knew. Sarah smiled. That's exactly what I mean. Strength comes in different forms. The conversation continued for another hour, covering everything from military tactics to family stories to personal motivations. Sarah realized that somewhere during the past week and a half, these men had stopped seeing her as an outsider or a curiosity. They saw her as one of them, a soldier trying to earn the same goal. The next morning brought the navigation exercise, a 12-hour test that would take candidates through dense forest terrain with only a map, compass, and their own skills to guide them. Each candidate had to locate 8 different checkpoints in a specific order while carrying full gear and maintaining a demanding pace. Sarah had always been good with maps and directions. Growing up in Arizona, her family had taken camping trips that required careful navigation through desert terrain. She understood how to read topographical features and how to maintain direction even when visibility was limited. The course began in pre-dawn darkness, with candidates starting at 5-minute intervals to prevent them from following each other. Sarah was the third to start, which meant she would be navigating primarily on her own for the entire exercise. The first checkpoint was relatively easy to find, located near a distinctive rock formation that was clearly marked on the map. Sarah reached it ahead of schedule and took a moment to carefully plan her route to the second point. This was where many candidates made their first mistake. The second checkpoint appeared close on the map, but the terrain between the first and second points included a steep ravine that wasn't clearly indicated by the topographical lines. Candidates who tried to go directly would find themselves facing a dangerous climb or a lengthy detour. Sarah studied the map carefully and chose a longer but safer route that would take her around the ravine. It added 20 minutes to her time but guaranteed she would reach the checkpoint without injury or excessive fatigue. As she navigated through the forest, Sarah found herself thinking about the mental aspects of what she was doing. Navigation required constant decision-making under pressure. Each choice, which route to take, how to interpret unclear terrain features, when to trust the compass versus visual landmarks, could mean the difference between success and failure. It was, she realized, exactly the kind of thinking that rangers needed in combat situations. Technical knowledge was important, but judgment under pressure was crucial. She reached the second checkpoint on schedule and found Williams there, looking frustrated. I tried to go straight across that ravine, he admitted. Ended up backtracking for 30 minutes. Sarah nodded sympathetically. I took the long way around. Sometimes slower is faster. They compared notes briefly, then headed in different directions toward their respective third checkpoints. Each candidate had been given a different route to prevent collaboration, but seeing another familiar face in the middle of the exercise was reassuring. The third checkpoint was located on a hilltop that required a steep climb through thick underbrush. This was where Sarah's size became an advantage. She could move through areas that would have snagged bigger candidates, and her lower center of gravity made her more stable on the steep terrain. She reached the hilltop ahead of schedule and took a moment to enjoy the view. From this vantage point, she could see the entire course laid out below her, the forest they had been moving through, the ravine that had caused Williams trouble, and the distant mountains where the final phase of selection would take place. For just a moment, Sarah allowed herself to feel proud of how far she had come. 10 days ago, she had been one of 24 candidates. Now there were only 14 left, and she was still among them. But pride was a luxury she couldn't afford for long. The fourth checkpoint was in a valley that would require careful navigation through terrain with few distinctive landmarks. This was where many candidates got lost and ended up wandering in circles until they ran out of time. Sarah took extra time to carefully plot her route, identifying intermediate landmarks she could use to maintain her direction. The technique had been taught during basic navigation training, but many candidates ignored it under pressure, preferring to trust their instincts rather than systematic planning. The descent from the hilltop was treacherous, with loose rocks and hidden roots that could easily cause a twisted ankle or worse. Sarah moved carefully, testing each step and using trees for support when necessary. Speed was important, but not as important as arriving at the bottom and conditioned to continue. In the valley, the thick canopy limited visibility and made it difficult to maintain direction. Sarah used her compass religiously, stopping every few hundred meters to check her bearing and identify her location on the map. It was slow going, but it was accurate. When she finally reached the fourth checkpoint, the instructor noted that she was still well within the time limit. "Good navigation, Martinez," he said as he signed her scorecard. "Most candidates have been wandering around down here for an hour." The fifth checkpoint required crossing a creek and navigating through a swampy area that would test both navigation skills and physical endurance. Sarah's boots were soon caked with mud, and her uniform was soaked with sweat and marsh water. But she kept moving steadily, trusting her compass and her map-reading skills. When doubt crept in, and it did, especially during a 20-minute period when she couldn't locate any recognizable landmarks, she forced herself to stick to the systematic approach she had planned. The sixth checkpoint was located at the ruins of an old building, barely visible through the trees until she was almost on top of it. Sarah felt a surge of relief when she spotted the instructor waiting with his clipboard. "Checkpoint 6, she announced, breathing hard. "Time check shows you're still in good shape," the instructor said. "2 more to go." The seventh checkpoint tested her ability to navigate using only natural landmarks. The area had been deliberately chosen because it contained very few distinctive features, just rolling hills covered with similar-looking trees. This was where Sarah's desert camping experience proved valuable. She had learned to navigate in terrain where one hill looked much like another and landmarks were subtle differences in vegetation, rock formations, or the way shadows fell. She moved methodically, constantly checking her position and adjusting her route based on small details that other candidates might miss. When she reached the seventh checkpoint, she was actually ahead of her projected schedule. The eighth and final checkpoint was the most challenging, requiring a steep climb up a rocky face that tested both navigation skills and physical endurance. Sarah's legs were already tired from 12 hours of hiking, but she pushed through the fatigue and methodically worked her way up the slope. When she finally reached the final checkpoint as the sun was setting, Sarah felt a wave of exhaustion and relief. The instructor checked his watch and made a note on his clipboard. "Congratulations, Martinez. You completed the course with 45 minutes to spare." Sarah nearly collapsed with relief. She had not only finished but had done so comfortably within the time limit. More importantly, she had proven to herself that she could handle complex challenges that required both technical skill and mental toughness. As she made her way back to base camp in the gathering darkness, Sarah reflected on what the day had taught her. She might never be the strongest or fastest candidate, but she was learning that success in challenging situations often depended more on preparation, systematic thinking, and refusal to panic than on raw physical ability. The navigation exercise had been a test of many things, but, most importantly, it had been a test of her ability to make good decisions under pressure while managing fatigue and stress. Those were exactly the qualities that Rangers needed in combat situations. When she arrived back at the barracks, Sarah found that she was one of only 12 candidates remaining. 2 more had been dropped during the navigation exercise, one for exceeding the time limit and another for a safety violation. Stevens, the former football player, was waiting when she walked in. "How'd you do, little engine?" he asked with a grin. "Finished with time to spare," Sarah said, too tired to be modest. "Outstanding. We're down to 12 now. Think you're ready for the field phase?" Sarah looked around at the remaining candidates, 11 men and herself, all of them proven soldiers who had earned their place through 2 weeks of intensive evaluation. "I'm ready," she said, and, for the first time since arriving at selection, she truly believed it. The field phase began at midnight with a wake-up call that wasn't really a wake-up call since none of the 12 remaining candidates had been sleeping. They had spent the previous evening checking and rechecking their equipment, knowing that the next 5 days would test everything they had learned and push them to their absolute limits. Sarah strapped on her rucksack in the darkness, feeling the familiar weight of 50 pounds of gear settle onto her shoulders. Around her, the other candidates were making final adjustments to their equipment and sharing quiet words of encouragement. "Listen up, Captain Rodriguez announced as they assembled outside the barracks. For the next 5 days, you will be operating in the mountains with minimal food, limited sleep, and constant pressure. You will be evaluated on your leadership, your decision-making, and your ability to function effectively under extreme stress. He paused, looking at each candidate in turn. Some of you will not complete this phase. That's not a reflection of your worth as soldiers, but it is a reality of this program. Rangers must be able to operate effectively in the worst possible conditions. If you cannot do that, you cannot be a ranger. The first challenge came immediately, a 12-mile night march through mountain terrain with only map, compass, and red lens flashlights for navigation. Candidates would rotate leadership responsibilities every 2 miles, with each leader responsible for keeping the group on course and on schedule. Sarah was assigned to lead the third leg, which would take them through the most technically challenging terrain of the march. As the group moved out into the darkness, she used the first 4 miles to study the route ahead and mentally rehearse her leadership plan. When Stevens, who was leading the second leg, turned leadership over to her at the designated checkpoint, Sarah was ready. "Okay, everyone gather around," she said quietly, spreading her map on the ground and using her red lens flashlight to illuminate it. "The next 2 miles take us up this ridgeline and, then, down into a valley. The terrain is steep and there are several places where we could easily get off course." She pointed to specific features on the map. "I'm going to set a deliberate pace that keeps us together and on schedule. Johnson, you'll be my navigator. Williams, you'll watch our 6 and keep count to make sure we don't lose anyone. Questions?" There were no questions. After 2 weeks of selection, the remaining candidates had learned to trust each other's competence. The climb up the ridgeline was brutal. The mountain air was thin and cold, and the rocky terrain made each step treacherous. Sarah set a steady pace that pushed the group without exhausting them, stopping periodically to check their position and ensure everyone was keeping up. At the halfway point of her leadership leg, disaster struck. Thompson, the tall soldier from Montana, stepped wrong on a loose rock and went down hard. Even in the darkness, Sarah could hear his sharp intake of breath and see that he was favoring his left ankle. "Hold up," Sarah called, signaling the group to stop. She moved quickly to Thompson's position and knelt beside him. "How bad?" she asked quietly. "I think it's just twisted," Thompson said through gritted teeth. "Give me a minute and I'll be fine." Sarah examined his ankle as best she could in the dim light. It was already beginning to swell, and Thompson was clearly in significant pain. This was exactly the kind of situation that separated real leaders from people who just wanted to be in charge. Sarah had several options, none of them good. She could call for medical evacuation, which would end Thompson's chances of completing selection and delay the entire group. She could leave Thompson behind with one other candidate, which would split the team. Or she could modify the plan to accommodate his injury. "Johnson," Sarah called quietly. "Come here." When Johnson approached, Sarah quickly explained the situation. "What do you think?" she asked. Johnson looked at Thompson, then at the map. "The original route has some pretty steep descents coming up. With a bad ankle, those could be dangerous." Sarah nodded. "That's what I'm thinking. Look here," she pointed to the map. "If we modify our route slightly, we can follow this contour line around the hill instead of going straight down. It's longer, but it's safer." "That'll add about 20 minutes, Johnson observed. "Better 20 minutes late than losing a team member," Sarah said. She made the decision quickly and communicated it clearly to the rest of the group. Thompson would continue with the team, but they would modify their route to accommodate his injury. Williams would assist Thompson on difficult terrain, and they would adjust their pace as necessary. It wasn't the fastest solution, but it was the right solution. The modified route worked perfectly. Thompson was able to continue with assistance, and the group arrived at the next checkpoint only 15 minutes behind schedule. More importantly, they arrived as a complete team. When Stevens took over leadership for the fourth leg, he pulled Sarah aside. "Good call back there," he said. "A lot of people would have called for medevac or pushed him to continue on the original route. Rangers don't leave people behind, Sarah said simply. No, they don't. But it takes good judgment to know when to modify the mission and when to push through. You made the right choice. The night march concluded at dawn with the group arriving tired but intact at the base camp for the field phase. Thompson's ankle was examined by medical personnel and determined to be severely sprained but not broken. With treatment and careful management, he would be able to continue. Captain Rodriguez had been monitoring the march from various checkpoints, and he made detailed notes about each candidate's performance during their leadership rotations. Sarah's handling of the Thompson situation had been exemplary: quick thinking, good judgment, and effective communication under pressure. But the real tests were just beginning. Day 2 brought the hunger. Candidates were given 1 MRE meal, ready to eat, per day, roughly 1,200 calories to sustain them through intensive physical and mental challenges. For someone of Sarah's size, this represented a significant caloric deficit that would affect both her physical performance and cognitive function. The day's challenge was a series of tactical exercises designed to test leadership under stress while managing fatigue and hunger. Teams of 3 candidates each were given scenarios involving hostage rescue, reconnaissance, and assault operations. Sarah was partnered with Martinez, still no relation despite the shared name, and Chen, a quiet soldier from California who had proven himself to be exceptionally reliable during previous exercises. Their first scenario was a simulated hostage rescue. They were given minimal intelligence about the target building, told there were 3 hostages and an unknown number of hostile forces, and instructed to develop and execute a plan within 60 minutes. Sarah found herself appointed as team leader, which meant she would be evaluated not just on her individual performance but on how effectively she coordinated her team's efforts. The building was a concrete structure with multiple entrances and windows. Sarah spent the first 15 minutes conducting a careful reconnaissance, identifying potential entry points, possible defensive positions, and likely locations for hostages. "Okay," she said to her teammates after completing the reconnaissance. "Here's what I see. The main entrance is too obvious, they'll be expecting that. But this side window," she pointed to a first-floor window partially concealed by vegetation, "gives us access to what looks like a storage room. If we can enter there quietly, we can clear the building systematically." Martinez nodded. "What about Overwatch? If things go wrong, we'll need covering fire." "Chen, you're our best marksman," Sarah said. "Can you find a position that covers both the front and back exits?" Chen studied the terrain for a moment. "That hill over there gives me good angles on both exits, but it's about 200 meters away. Long shots if we need immediate support." "It's a trade-off," Sarah agreed. "But I'd rather have precise long-range support than close-range firepower that might endanger the hostages." They spent another 20 minutes refining the plan, working through contingencies and communication protocols. Sarah insisted on multiple rehearsals of key movements before they began the actual exercise. The execution was nearly flawless. Chen provided overwatch while Sarah and Martinez entered through the side window. They moved systematically through the building, using hand signals and careful coordination to clear each room. They encountered the first simulated hostile in a hallway and neutralized him quickly and quietly. The second hostile was in the main room with 2 of the hostages, requiring a more complex approach. Sarah used a distraction technique, making noise at one entrance while Martinez entered from another direction. They eliminated the hostile and secured the hostages without any simulated casualties. The third hostile and third hostage were located in an upstairs room that required careful coordination to access safely. Again, Sarah's systematic approach and clear communication with her team resulted in a successful resolution. "Time," called the instructor. 42 minutes. All hostages secured, all hostiles neutralized, no friendly casualties. It was one of the best performances of the day, and Sarah felt a surge of pride. But she also noticed how much the lack of food was affecting her thinking. She had to concentrate harder to maintain focus, and simple decisions were taking longer than usual. Day 3 brought sleep deprivation on top of hunger. Candidates were allowed only 2 hours of rest before being awakened for another series of challenges. Sarah found herself operating in a strange state where her body was exhausted but her mind was hyper-alert. The day's exercise was individual leadership under extreme stress. Each candidate was given command of a simulated patrol and tasked with navigating to an objective while managing various crisis situations thrown at them by instructors. Sarah's scenario began with her leading a four-man patrol, played by instructors, through difficult terrain toward a reconnaissance objective. 15 minutes into the movement, one of her soldiers collapsed, apparently overcome by heat exhaustion. In her sleep-deprived and hungry state, Sarah's first instinct was to call for medical evacuation. But she caught herself and took a moment to think through the situation more carefully. A real patrol in enemy territory couldn't simply call for immediate evacuation. She needed to assess the severity of the condition and make a decision based on the tactical situation. Sarah examined the patient carefully, asked appropriate questions about symptoms, and determined that with rest and cooling, he could continue the mission. She found shade, had the patrol take a tactical rest, and implemented cooling measures. 20 minutes later, the heat casualty was ready to continue, and the patrol resumed movement toward the objective. But the challenges weren't over. An hour later, Sarah's patrol encountered a simulated enemy position that blocked their route to the objective. She had to quickly develop a plan to bypass or neutralize the position without compromising their reconnaissance mission. Working with minimal information and a tired team, Sarah developed a simple but effective plan. 2 members of the patrol would create a distraction while Sarah and the 4th member circled around to the objective. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. The final challenge came as they approached the objective area. Sarah's patrol was spotted by enemy forces and had to conduct a fighting withdrawal while still gathering the required intelligence. This tested everything she had learned about leadership under pressure. She had to simultaneously coordinate movement, direct fire, communicate with higher headquarters, and ensure the mission was completed. Despite her exhaustion and hunger, Sarah's mind worked clearly through the problem. She assigned sectors of fire, established rally points, and managed the withdrawal systematically. When the exercise ended, she had successfully gathered the required intelligence and gotten her patrol to safety without casualties. Outstanding performance, the instructor told her afterward. You maintained clarity of thought and effective decision-making throughout the exercise despite obvious fatigue. Sarah nodded her thanks, but she was too tired to feel much satisfaction. She was operating on pure determination now, and she knew the hardest challenges were still ahead. Day 4 brought the peer evaluation that everyone had been dreading. Each candidate had to rate every other candidate on leadership potential, teamwork, and overall suitability for the Ranger Regiment. These evaluations were crucial because they reflected how candidates were viewed by their peers under stress. Technical skills could be taught, but leadership and character had to be demonstrated and recognized by others. Sarah sat with her evaluation forms, thinking carefully about each of the remaining candidates. There were now only 9 left after 3 more had been dropped for various reasons during the field phase. She was honest in her assessments, rating each candidate based on what she had observed during 2.5 weeks of intense evaluation. Some were natural leaders who inspired confidence in difficult situations. Others were solid team members who could be relied upon to execute orders effectively. A few had struggled with the pressure and shown questionable judgment. When it came to rating herself, Sarah tried to be realistic. She knew she wasn't the strongest candidate physically, and she hadn't been the most naturally charismatic leader. But she had consistently made sound decisions under pressure, and she had earned the respect of her peers through competence and reliability. More importantly, she had never quit. No matter how difficult the challenges became, she had found ways to continue and contribute effectively to her team. The final day of the field phase brought the ultimate test, a 24-hour continuous operation with no sleep, minimal food, and constant leadership challenges. Sarah was assigned to lead a 12-hour patrol mission that would test everything she had learned about navigation, tactics, leadership, and decision-making under extreme stress. By this point, she was operating on reserves she didn't know she had. Her body was exhausted, her mind was fuzzy from lack of food and sleep, and every step was an effort of will. But, when she was given command of her team and tasked with conducting a complex reconnaissance mission, Sarah found that her training and experience took over. She planned the mission systematically, briefed her team clearly, and led from the front throughout the operation. When challenges arose, and they did, constantly, she adapted quickly and kept the team focused on the objective. 12 hours later, as she turned over command to the next candidate, Sarah realized something important had happened. She had stopped thinking about whether she was strong enough or tough enough or qualified enough. She had simply done the job. The field phase concluded at midnight on day 5 with 9 candidates still standing. Sarah was among them, barely upright but still functional. Captain Rodriguez addressed the exhausted group as they stood in formation one final time. "Congratulations," he said. "You have completed Ranger assessment and selection. You have proven that you possess the physical capabilities, mental toughness, and leadership potential required for service in the 75th Ranger Regiment." He paused, looking at each candidate. "But this is not the end. It is the beginning. You now have the opportunity to attend Ranger School, where you will earn the tab that identifies you as a graduate of the most demanding leadership course in the United States Army." Sarah felt tears of exhaustion and relief running down her cheeks. She had done it. She had proven to herself and everyone else that size and strength were not the only measures of a soldier's capability. But, more than that, she had honored Miguel's memory by following in his footsteps and earning the right to attempt the same challenges he had faced. 6 months later, Sarah stood in formation wearing the distinctive black and gold Ranger tab on her left shoulder. Ranger School had been even harder than selection, but she had persevered through every phase and earned her place among the elite. As she looked out at the audience gathered for the graduation ceremony, she spotted Drill Sergeant Thompson sitting in the bleachers. He had driven down from Fort Benning specifically to watch her graduate. After the ceremony, Thompson approached her with a smile. "I owe you an apology, Ranger Martinez," he said. "I was wrong about you." Sarah shook her head. "You weren't wrong, Drill Sergeant. You just saw what everyone else saw, someone who looked weak. But you also gave me the chance to prove that appearances can be deceiving." Thompson nodded slowly. "Your brother would be proud." "I hope so," Sarah said, touching the tab on her shoulder. "But, more than that, I hope I've shown other people that strength comes in many different forms." As she walked across the parade ground that day, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had started as a scared girl who wanted to honor her brother's memory. She was ending as a proven leader who had earned her place among the Army's elite through determination, intelligence, and an absolute refusal to quit. The Ranger tab on her shoulder wasn't just a symbol of her personal achievement. It was proof that anyone with enough determination and heart could overcome the limitations others placed on them. She was still small. She was still quiet. But no one would ever again mistake Sarah Martinez for weak.